I used to think the worst thing that could happen at an intersection was a fender bender. Turns out, mine didn't just dent metal, it cracked open my marriage. One moment I was a cautious driver, a man with a stable job and a quiet home. The next, I was staring into the smirk of a stranger who knew my wife's name, her red dress, and a secret life I was never meant to uncover. The light turned green, but I didn't move right away. My mind was still running numbers from the meeting I just left, double-checking columns of figures the way I always did, even when I wasn't at my desk. That hesitation, 2 seconds at most, was all it took for the car behind me to lean on its horn. I tapped the accelerator, easing my silver Accord into the intersection by Riverside Mall, when something sharp cracked against the left fender. The sound jolted me. My hands tightened on the wheel. In the corner of my eye, I caught the sleek black blur of a BMW slicing past too close, its mirror clipping mine with surgical precision. Metal against metal. I pulled over immediately, heart thudding with the familiar cocktail of irritation and control. My car was my sanctuary, an extension of the order I tried to maintain everywhere else in life. A scratch felt like an intrusion. The BMW glided to the curb ahead of me, purring like a predator. Out stepped its owner, tall, immaculately dressed, his suit cut so well it practically whispered custom tailoring. His hair was slicked back, his watch glinting even in the weak Denver sun. "Sorry about that," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "You hesitated. Couldn't quite tell if you were going or not." I clenched my jaw, but kept my voice level. "You hit me. That's not on me." He smirked, pulling out a business card with a flourish, like a magician revealing a trick. "Daniel Cross. I'll cover the damage. Don't worry, it's just a scratch. No need to get worked up." The arrogance dripped from him, but what really caught me was the name. Cross. It tickled something at the back of my mind, though I couldn't place it. As we traded insurance information, his eyes lingered on me longer than necessary, like he was cataloging me for later use. Then, as if he couldn't resist, he leaned casually against his car and said, "By the way, I think I know your wife." My stomach tightened. "Laura." He smiled, slow and deliberate, like a shark showing teeth. "Yeah, Laura Renner, right? Met her at the Aspen Grand Hotel last month. Corporate seminar. She looked stunning in that red cocktail dress. Hard to forget." The world tilted a fraction. Red cocktail dress? I remembered the night he was talking about. Laura had said she was stuck at the office late, wearing her navy suit, stressed about deadlines. I'd brought her coffee when she got home. She'd smelled faintly of perfume, not stress. I hadn't questioned it. Until now. Daniel must have seen the shift in my expression, because his grin widened. "She's quite the woman. You're a lucky guy." His tone wasn't congratulatory. It was suggestive, knowing. I forced myself to finish writing down the last digits of my insurance. "We're done here," I said, my voice clipped. He gave a little nod, like he'd just won a round of a game I hadn't agreed to play. Then he slid into his BMW, revved the engine, and disappeared into traffic, leaving me staring at his exhaust fumes and the sudden weight pressing into my gut. I sat there for a long moment, the city buzzing around me. Laura in a red dress. Laura at a hotel she never mentioned. Laura laughing with a man like Daniel Cross, who exuded money and danger like cologne. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe he was showing off, trying to rattle me. But the numbers didn't add up, and I knew numbers. They were my life, my anchor, my truth. And right then, for the first time in years, I felt the ledger of my marriage tilt into uncertainty. Back in Aurora, the afternoon light spread across our kitchen like a neat spreadsheet. Every tile square and accounted for. Laura came home late, keys tossed in a bright arc that landed just shy of the bowl, close enough to pass for intention, far enough to register as carelessness. She kissed the air near my cheek, missing, then pretended that counted. I asked about the seminar in Aspen, careful, casual. She slipped off her blazer, navy, like she said, and laughed. "God, that thing. Boring. Breakout sessions about vendor compliance. You'd have loved it." I watched her lie the way I watch numbers misalign. First a rounding error, then a story. "What did you wear?" I asked, pretending to load the dishwasher. She didn't look at me. "The suit, obviously." Why? No reason. She smiled like a closing parenthesis. Then she sniffed her wrist and frowned as if the perfume there surprised even her. New, silk smooth, almost edible. On her, it was dangerous. I remembered Daniel's teeth-baring grin at the intersection and felt that small tilt in my gut again, the ledger line that wouldn't balance. Later, she showered with the door cracked, steam drifting down the hall. I stood in our bedroom, folding Ethan's soccer jersey, and caught a slice of her in the mirror, a red strap pressed to her shoulder as she hung something, quick, thoughtless, like hiding a decimal. Red. By the time she stepped out wrapped in a towel, the hanger was empty. Navy dress on a chair. The mirror offered no evidence. We should do date night, I said. I tried to make it sound like a shrug and not a test. She answered, scrolling. This week is insane. Next week. Sure. She climbed into bed with the practiced choreography of someone avoiding contact, without looking like she was avoiding contact. We used to tangle our legs as a default setting. Now there was a DMZ down the center of the mattress, and peace talks were indefinitely postponed. We still had sex, technically, but quantity had replaced heat. On the rare nights it happened, it felt like a procedure. Routine, documented, filed. My body remembered how to want her. Her collarbone still set off quiet alarms, and the damp notch at the base of her throat could have led me anywhere, but appetite without invitation curdles into embarrassment. I turned out the light before I could take an audit of myself too. The next morning, Ethan shuffled into the kitchen, lanky and sleep-eyed. 16 and already measuring the house with a man's stare. He poured cereal, sniffed, and said, "Mom's new perfume smells like gum." "Classy gum," I said. He shrugged. "She seems happier lately. Like when she's out." He said it carefully, testing the words for sharp edges. Happier. When she comes in late, she's humming. When she's here, she's quiet. Did you guys fight? No, the answer tasted false. We're fine. He accepted it with the sacramental apathy of teenagers and retreated to his headphones, leaving me at the island with my coffee and a growing stack of mental notes. In my world, you don't accuse. You reconcile. You isolate variances. You ask why the numbers moved and who moved them. You don't say fraud until you can prove intent. I started small. Time stamps. She said stuck at the office. But her navigation history, open map on her tablet, a habit of hers, suggested downtown routes at irregular hours. Twice to a tower near Union Station, once to a boutique hotel on a Thursday. I told myself there were work reasons. There usually are. She began working late more often. I began eating alone more often. On Tuesday, I plated her salmon, wrapped it in foil, and stuck it in the fridge. At 11, I heard the garage door. She came in flushed, hair wind-tossed like she'd been running or laughing too hard. She kissed my forehead, a benediction for the faithful. You didn't have to wait up. I didn't, I said. I watched her thumb unlock her phone under the table, the quick flick smile that isn't for me. She turned her screen face down. On Thursday, she wore heels I hadn't seen in months. Laura was always beautiful, but tonight she arranged herself like a headline. A new dress, black, spare, a whisper along her ribs that made my fingers ache to follow the seam. She leaned over the counter to find her keys, the dress sharpening the arc of her, and I felt that old surge, that reckless need to put my hands on my wife and remind both of us who we were. The word sex hung electric between us, unsaid and glaring. Big client dinner? I asked. Kind of. She dabbed the gum, perfume on her throat. Don't wait up. Will you be late or just late? She laughed, bright, brittle. Michael, since when are you my curfew? I swallowed the answer. Since the math got weird. Since your silence started costing more than I can afford. Drive safe, I said. It came out like an apology. The house thinned without her. I washed dishes we hadn't used, and wiped counters already clean. When you can't fix the big thing, you polish the small things until they shine like lies. Around 10, Ethan came downstairs, rubbing his eyes. Mom out. Work thing. He frowned. She says that a lot. She works hard. So do you, he said, simple as a verdict, then drifted back upstairs. That lodged under my ribs and stayed there. The next few days, the pattern hardened. New perfume. Later nights. Messages that made her smile in rooms I wasn't in. She angled her body away when I walked past, like my proximity was an inconvenience. When I tried to pin anything down, where, who, when, she gave me answers that were technically correct. Client names, restaurant chains, the beige nouns of professional life. I recognized the tactic. A ledger can be clean and still be dishonest if you book the entries to the wrong accounts. Sunday morning, I found a receipt in the dryer trap, her old habit of wadding pockets before laundry. Lakeshore Inn, 2 cocktails, 1 room service, dessert at 11:43 p.m. The check was signed with a flourish I didn't recognize. Not hers. Not mine. Daniel's card had featured a slanted, expensive signature, the kind that screams confidence from a tip line. The loop on this one looked familiar enough to make my fingers cold. Laura came into the laundry room barefoot, towel-twisted hair leaving dark drips on her t-shirt. She saw the paper in my hand and didn't flinch. "We brought dessert up for a meeting," she said. Conference room was freezing. "We, compliance team. Michael, I do not have to defend eating cake." I nodded like I bought it. Maybe I could, if I wanted to lose money. She took the receipt from my fingers, folded it once, and slid it into the trash as if she'd just balanced an account. That night in bed, I rolled toward her. "Can we talk?" She stared at the ceiling. "About what?" "About us." "We're fine." "Are we?" Her sigh was theatrical, an actress bored with the script. "I am exhausted. Can we not do this now?" I felt myself step back inside, silently. The old me would have pushed, demanded clarity. The auditor in me chose quiet. You don't force the numbers, you pull the thread. So I put my arm behind my head and stared into the dark. Beside me, Laura scrolled, a private universe glowing in her palm. The DMZ widened. The house creaked like it was keeping confidences. Before sleep took me, I pictured the intersection at Riverside, the glint of Daniel's watch, the easy way he'd said her name. The ledger waited on my desk at work, neat columns and calm math. Tomorrow I'd bring that discipline home. I would not accuse. I would examine. I would reconcile. And if the account still failed to balance, I would accept what the variance meant. Numbers don't lie. That was the mantra drilled into me from the first year I worked as an auditor. They tell stories when people won't. They expose what's hidden in polished smiles and careful words. That week, I began turning my marriage into a ledger. It started with the little things. Bank notifications, purchase alerts, subtle changes that didn't match the patterns of the Laura I thought I knew. She used to be frugal, couponing on Saturdays, nagging me about leaving lights on, sighing over how much Ethan's soccer gear cost. But suddenly, the numbers ballooned in places that didn't make sense. The first jolt came on our joint credit card statement. A $480 charge at Bistro Lumiere, a French restaurant where the cheapest entree was $60. Laura had once called it pretentious food for people who want to Instagram their dinner. Yet there it was, her card, late on a Thursday night, when she told me she was in the office eating takeout. Next was the lingerie, a $312 charge at Etoile Intimates, downtown boutique. I'd never seen the purchases in our house. Not tucked in her drawer, not in the laundry. Lingerie wasn't for boardrooms or working late. It was for someone else. Then came the hotel bills. The Lakeshore Inn, neat little place near Cherry Creek. Twice in 1 month. Always on Thursdays. Always after she'd claimed she was trapped in compliance meetings. The invoices spelled it out. Room service for 2, wine, late-night checkouts. The details were more precise than any confession. I dug deeper, like I would for any client I suspected of cooking their books. Our savings account had taken a hit. Transfers in neat $500 increments, regular as clockwork. At first, I thought maybe she was hiding spending money from me. But then I saw the loan, a $30,000 line taken out in both our names, signed by Laura alone. I never authorized it. Never even knew it existed until the paperwork surfaced in a side folder of our joint bank account. I remember sitting at my desk at home, papers spread out like evidence in a trial. Every transaction glared back at me like a red flag. Bistro Lumiere, Etoile Intimates, Lakeshore Inn. It was all there, laid bare by the math. That night, she walked in humming, her new perfume trailing behind her. She kissed my cheek, quick and distracted, while scrolling through her phone. I stared at her, and for the first time, she felt like a stranger trespassing in my house. "Long day?" she asked, her tone flat. "Yeah, long day." I closed my laptop before she could see the screen, full of her own secrets. I lay awake later, listening to her even breathing beside me. I used to love watching her sleep, her lips parted slightly, her hand curling under her chin, the little twitch of her nose when she dreamed. Now it felt like I was next to a forgery. The signature looked right, but the account was fraudulent. Saturday morning, I sat with Ethan at the kitchen table, balancing the family budget while he scrolled on his phone. 16, old enough to notice. He peered over. "Why are you so intense with the bills?" he asked. "Just making sure we're not overspending." He gave a shrug. "Mom's been buying a lot of new stuff. Clothes. Shoes. I saw the bags in her car last week." "Did she show you what she bought?" "Nope. She just said it was work stuff." He paused, then looked at me seriously. "Dad, she seems happier when she's away. Like when she's not here." The words hit harder than any bank statement. Even Ethan saw it. Even my son, who should have been oblivious in his own teenage world, noticed his mother slipping out of ours. That evening, Laura said she was heading to the office again. I kissed her goodbye and held on just a little too long. She pulled back, forcing a smile. "Don't worry so much." But I did. After she left, I opened the folder again, laying out the receipts like puzzle pieces. Lingerie that wasn't for me. Dinner she once mocked, now indulgences. Hotels billed under business expenses. The loan, the transfers, the secrecy. Fraud leaves trails. People always think they're careful, but eventually the ledgers tell the truth. And here, the truth was staring me in the face. Laura wasn't just slipping away emotionally. She was investing elsewhere. I didn't say a word that night when she returned, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. She showered, hummed, and slid into bed, giving me her back. I lay there, my mind balancing the books of our marriage. Assets, one son, a home, 15 years of history. Liabilities, deceit, secrecy, another man's shadow. The equation was starting to look irreversible. I used to think shadow work was a term for therapists and philosophers, the kind of deep soul-digging people did when they had time for retreats in the Rockies. But now, sitting in my car across from the Pearl Street Cafe, with a lukewarm coffee in my hand, I understood it differently. My shadow work wasn't about healing. It was about uncovering, about seeing what my wife did when she thought I wasn't looking. Laura walked into the cafe at 10:07 a.m., hair loose, her red scarf trailing like a flag. She spotted him almost instantly. Daniel Cross, the man with the BMW, the man who'd grinned at me like he was already inside my life. He stood, kissed her cheek, and pulled her into a booth like he'd reserved it just for her. I raised my phone, the lens pressed against the edge of the steering wheel. One click, then another. Time-stamped. Photographic evidence. I'd built cases with less. They laughed. She touched his hand across the table, casual, like it belonged to her. He leaned in, whispering something that made her cover her mouth, giggling like a woman I hadn't seen in years. The Laura I lived with was all clipped tones and guarded glances. This one was open, glowing, alive. For 2 hours I sat there cataloging, coffee cups replaced by water glasses, his hand sliding across the table, hers not moving away. When they finally stood, he placed his hand on the small of her back in that intimate way men do when they're claiming territory. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. By the time they left, I had 43 photos. Enough for a case file, not enough for a conviction. I wasn't rushing. Audits require patience. You don't build findings on one anomalous transaction. You build them on patterns. So I built mine. Thursdays, it turned out, were hotel nights. The Lakeshore Inn, where her car appeared neatly in the lot around 8:15 p.m. and didn't leave until past midnight. Tuesdays were his Union Station high-rise. She'd swipe into the garage, park in the guest section, and vanish for hours. The patterns formed neatly, like the reconciled lines of a spreadsheet. Each time, I documented. Photos, license plate shots, screenshots of text alerts showing work dinners that coincided perfectly with her absences. The evidence piled higher than the laundry she never touched anymore. At night, lying next to her, I felt the heat of her body radiating across the gulf between us. Sometimes I caught myself staring at the curve of her hip beneath the sheets, remembering the way she used to arch toward me when I touched her. Now she curled away. Still, I couldn't stop the pulse that ran through me when she bent to slip on those new black heels. When the hem of her skirt rose, just enough to reveal skin she no longer offered to me. Sex was no longer ours, but my body didn't know the difference. Desire is cruel that way. It lingers even when trust is gone. One Thursday, I left work early and parked across from the Lakeshore Inn. At 7:48 p.m., her car rolled in. At 8:02, Daniel's BMW slid into the lot, like a shark joining a feeding ground. They met at the entrance, their kiss quick but unashamed. My camera clicked in steady rhythm, my hand steady, my chest hollow. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation without preparation is emotion, and emotion loses. I was building a file, a ledger of deceit so clean, so undeniable, that when the time came, there would be no escape clause. The next week, I tracked her downtown. Daniel's luxury tower rose like a middle finger over Union Station. I waited as she keyed in, her heels sharp against the polished floor, her smile easy, unguarded. I took the shot and noted the time, 6:31 p.m. She didn't leave until nearly midnight. Driving home alone, I felt the edges of something dangerous in me. Not rage, not sorrow, calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes when you're assembling a story piece by piece, and you already know the ending. At dinner, Ethan asked where Mom was. I lied. Work thing. He nodded, chewing slowly. His eyes flicked to mine, and for a second, I wondered if he believed me, or if he, too, was starting to keep his own private ledger. Laura came home late that night, smelling faintly of wine and someone else's cologne. She kissed my cheek, a gesture so light it barely registered, and slipped upstairs. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, listening to the echo of her footsteps. Fraud isn't just numbers. Fraud is a story someone tells while the truth hides in the margins. And now I had margins filled with timestamps, receipts, and photographs. The story was writing itself. When you stare at ledgers long enough, the lies begin to unravel themselves. At first, Daniel Cross looked untouchable, BMWs, tailored suits, the kind of confidence that made waiters sprint to his table before anyone else's. But arrogance has a way of leaving fingerprints, and I was already in the business of tracing them. I started small. Public records, court filings, property taxes. You'd be surprised how much a man leaves in plain sight when he thinks no one's looking. The first crack was almost invisible. A lien on his loft near Union Station. Overdue association fees, 3 months behind. A man like Daniel wasn't supposed to miss payments. Not unless the shine was already fading. Curiosity sharpened into obsession. I dug into every lead like a bloodhound. His company, Cross and Harrington Consulting, had recently expanded its Denver office, and at first glance it looked pristine. But expense reports and charitable contributions are often where fraud hides. Through a contact in compliance, an old colleague who owed me a favor, I slipped into the edges of his financial world. That's where I found it. A charity fund Daniel managed, donations flowing in and out like water through a sieve. Tens of thousands redirected into personal accounts, labeled as miscellaneous expenses. Sloppy, arrogant theft. Then came the gambling. An email thread, buried in a hacked account I shouldn't have had access to, revealed trips to Las Vegas. Not the kind people brag about on Instagram. These were underground poker clubs, places where buy-ins started at 20 grand and losses could spiral into 6 figures overnight. Daniel had a habit. Worse, he had debts. A ledger of his own painted the picture. Frantic wire transfers, urgent subject lines like needed covered by tomorrow, or tell Laura to send more. That last one turned my blood cold. Laura, my Laura, had been moving money from our accounts, smoothing over Daniel's messes while I slept beside her. She wasn't just betraying me with her body. She was underwriting his fraud. I pieced together how it worked. She funneled joint savings into small transfers, masking them as household expenses. Then she took the $30,000 loan, our names, her signature, and pushed most of it into Daniel's account to keep him afloat. My wife, the woman who once clipped grocery coupons, was now laundering my future into his empire of cards. One night, while she showered, I opened her laptop. Her password was still Ethan's birthday, habit she hadn't bothered to change. There it was, clear as day. Emails with subject lines that read like intimate confessions, but were really logistics. I'll cover the BMW payment this month. Don't stress, I'll move it by Friday. Dinner Thursday, same place? Each message felt like a nail hammered into my chest. Not just betrayal, but complicity. She wasn't the victim of Daniel's charm. She was his partner in crime. The more I uncovered, the more the shine of Daniel's empire dulled. His BMW? 3 payments overdue. The repossession notice already filed. His loft? Half mortgaged, equity siphoned off to cover gambling nights. Even the watch that had gleamed on his wrist that day at the intersection was pawned and reacquired twice in 6 months. Smoke and mirrors, held up by my wife's willingness to bankroll the illusion. I printed everything. Bank statements, emails, screenshots of debt collectors leaving digital footprints. I built binders, tabbed by category: gambling, fraud, embezzlement, personal debts. The kind of file I could have walked into court with and left no room for doubt. But this wasn't about court. Not yet. This was about leverage. About understanding the scope of the enemy who had taken root in my home, in my bed. Laura's changes made sense now. The perfume, the late nights, the expensive lingerie I'd never seen. Those weren't random indulgences. They were tools of an operation. Her way of keeping Daniel hooked, invested, willing to let her manage his debts because she gave him everything else. She wasn't only cheating, she was funding. I sat in the dark of my office one night. The file spread across my desk. Ethan's laughter floated faintly from upstairs. The sound of a boy still innocent of how rotten the foundations beneath him had become. I promised myself then, I wouldn't let this empire drag my son down. Daniel thought he was untouchable. Laura thought she was clever. But the numbers told me otherwise. Empires like his didn't collapse with explosions. They buckled quietly under the weight of their own lies, like beams eaten hollow by termites. I wasn't just waiting anymore. I was planning. And this time, I wasn't just an auditor tallying numbers. I was the executioner sharpening the blade. Every fraud has a tipping point. That moment when the weight of lies is so heavy that the smallest nudge sends everything crashing down. I'd spent weeks building my file, Laura's transfers, Daniel's debts, the paper-thin walls of his empire. Now it was time to push. Not with fists or fury, but with precision. The first move was subtle. Anonymous tips. I drafted an email from a burner account, attaching a few carefully chosen screenshots. Daniel's expense reimbursements for client entertainment that were actually Vegas poker buy-ins. I didn't send everything, just enough to plant seeds of doubt inside his firm's compliance department. Auditors are like sharks. Once they smell blood, they don't stop until they've devoured everything. The second move was personal. Claire Cross, Daniel's wife, tucked away in Chicago. I found her easily. A public Facebook profile full of family photos and smiling kids. A perfect life, at least on the surface. I sent her a message from another burner. Check Daniel's accounts. Start with the charity fund. No explanation, no flourish. Just breadcrumbs. The kind of clue a suspicious spouse couldn't ignore. The third move was protective. Laura had tried to siphon off another chunk of our joint savings. This time, I intercepted it. Transferred the funds back before they cleared, rerouting the account into one she couldn't touch. When she confronted me, her voice light, pretending it was all a mistake, I simply shrugged. Bank must have flagged it. You know how they are. She gave me a tight smile and kissed my cheek, but her eyes flickered with unease. She knew the walls were shifting. My fourth move brought another player onto the board. A private investigator named Harris, grizzled, quiet, the kind of man who'd seen too many affairs and too many frauds. I gave him copies of what I had, told him I needed more. He raised an eyebrow when he saw the neat binders, the tabs, the timestamps. You do my job better than me. he muttered. Still, he took the case. And with him came pressure from angles Daniel wouldn't see until it was too late. Piece by piece, I wove the net tighter. Daniel's company launched an internal review. Claire booked a flight to Denver. Harris found records of unpaid markers from Vegas clubs with reputations for collecting debts in ways the law didn't sanction. And all the while, Laura moved through our house like a woman distracted, her phone glued to her hand, her smiles thinner than they'd ever been. I waited, patient, calm. Like watching dominoes I'd lined up topple in perfect sequence. One evening, Laura came home late, the scent of wine heavy on her breath. She dropped her heels by the door and slumped into the chair across from me. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice probing. "Just work," I answered, closing the binder on the dining table before she could see the contents. She studied me, suspicion flickering behind her eyes. For years, I'd been predictable, steady, transparent. Now the balance had shifted. She was the one off-kilter, sensing a storm she couldn't chart. Later that night, I lay awake, listening to her breathe. My mind wasn't on her anymore, or on Daniel. It was on Ethan, on making sure that when this empire collapsed, my son wouldn't be crushed in the rubble. I thought of Daniel's grin that day at the intersection, the way he'd spoken Laura's name like it belonged to him. I thought of Laura's laughter in the cafe, her hand resting so easily on his. And I thought of the numbers, always the numbers, that told me their story better than their lips ever could. They believed they were in control. But the trap was already set. The auditors were circling. Claire was watching. Harris was digging. And I was right here, silent in the shadows, pulling the strings. All I had to do now was wait for the collapse. The first tremor came on a Tuesday morning. Daniel's firm announced an internal audit, cloaked in corporate language about ensuring transparency and maintaining client trust. To most, it sounded routine. To Daniel, it was the sound of wolves at the door. My inbox lit up with alerts from Harris, whispers of panic meetings, compliance officers combing through files, and Daniel suddenly working late. Not the playful, intoxicating late nights with Laura, but the desperate kind where the walls of your kingdom start closing in. By Thursday, Claire Cross arrived in Denver. I didn't have to imagine her fury. Harris gave me the highlights. She'd stormed into Daniel's loft, luggage still in hand, waving printed bank statements like weapons. Neighbors reported, shouting that spilled into the hallway. Daniel's BMW was gone for hours after that, parked in odd corners of the city like he couldn't figure out where home was anymore. Laura felt the shift too. She came home wired, restless, phone glued to her palm, her laughter brittle whenever she answered calls she wouldn't take in front of me. She paced more, drank more, smiled less. Ethan noticed. He asked if Mom was sick. I told him she was just stressed. Lies for survival. By the weekend, their routine was unraveling. The Thursday hotel rendezvous ended in an argument loud enough that Harris, parked across the street, could hear it through a cracked window. Laura stormed out first, eyes red, makeup streaked. Daniel followed 20 minutes later alone, his tie loosened like a man who'd already lost. The photos Harris sent me told a story more vivid than words. Laura clutching her phone, her hands trembling. Daniel slumped against his car, face buried in his palms. Lovers don't look like that unless the world is tilting under them. At home, Laura grew tense, cornered by pressure she couldn't name out loud. She skipped dinners, canceled plans, retreated into her phone. When I tried to engage, gentle questions, small talk, she deflected with sharpness. "Don't start, Michael. I'm tired." Or worse, silence, the kind that builds walls higher than words ever could. Ethan finally broke one night. We sat at the table, plates between us untouched, Laura absent again. "Dad," he said, voice low. "What's happening?" "She's not here anymore. Even when she is, she's not here." His eyes shone with hurt, and I had no ledger to balance that away. "She's going through things," I answered, the vagueness a shield. He looked at me, unblinking, as if he could see through every excuse. "So are you," he said. Then he pushed his chair back and left me at the table, alone with the truth my son could already name. The breaking point came on a stormy Thursday. Rain lashed the windows as I sat in the car outside the Lakeshore Inn. Laura and Daniel met, as usual, but the air was wrong from the start. They didn't embrace. They argued before they even reached the lobby. I saw her finger jab into his chest, his hand slicing the air in wild defense. Inside that hotel, love curdled into accusation. Harris later told me their voices carried down the hall. "You said this was under control." Laura's sharp, frantic tone. Daniel snapping back. "I never promised you anything." When she stormed out, she didn't look radiant or alive. She looked broken, mascara streaks on her cheeks, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her keys. She sat in her car for 10 minutes before pulling away, shoulders hunched, body caved in. That night, she came home quiet, almost ghost-like. She moved through the house without touching anything, without touching me. She slipped into bed fully clothed, turned away, and pretended to sleep. But I lay awake beside her, listening to the shallow rhythm of her breath, feeling the space between us expand until it felt like a canyon. I had built a trap. The walls were closing in. Daniel's empire was cracking. Laura's mask was slipping, and Ethan's eyes saw more than either of us wanted him to. And still, part of me ached. Even as I cataloged the lies, even as I prepared the final blow, some stubborn piece of me remembered the woman I married, the woman who once curled against me in the dark, who smelled like coffee and sunlight instead of secrets and perfume. That memory was the hardest fraud to reconcile, because no matter how complete my file became, no matter how undeniable the evidence, I couldn't audit love out of existence. But the collapse was coming, and when it did, there would be no ledger clean enough to rebuild what she had destroyed. I set the dining table the way I do before a serious audit. Good light, clean surface, nothing to distract the eye from the data. No dinner plates, no wine, just a thick, black binder and a banker's envelope that sighed with the weight of printed truth. The house had that evening stillness Denver gets before the temperature drops. Even the refrigerator seemed to breathe quieter. Ethan was at a friend's, due home later. I'd planned for that. This conversation was rated for adults only. Laura came in at 7:36, the garage door echoing down the hallway like a gavel. She paused when she saw the table. The way her shoulders rose and fell told me she understood, on some instinct older than language, that this wasn't a fight. It was a verdict. "What's this?" she asked, fingers still curled around her car keys. "An accounting," I said. "Have a seat." She did, carefully, like the chair might bite. I opened the binder to the first tab. Photographs. Clean prints, timestamps in the corner. Laura and Daniel at the Pearl Street Cafe, at the Lakeshore Inn, stepping into the elevator at his high-rise, his hand at the small of her back, her face turned up to him in a way I hadn't seen in years. She stared, chin hardening, then tried the first offense of every bad transaction. "This is invasive." "This is evidence," I said, turning the page. Receipts from the hotel. Room service charges. The same Thursday pattern repeating like a heartbeat. "And this is pattern." "I was working," she said, almost bored, like a woman rejecting an upsell. "With dessert at 11:43 p.m.? I slid a finger under the line item. "With wine for two." Her gaze slid sideways. "You're twisting things." I flipped to tab 2. Bank statements. Transfers in neat $500 bites, drained from our savings, and washed through her personal account before ending up in an entity linked to Daniel. I let the numbers sit between us like a smell. "You took out a $30,000 loan in both our names," I said. "You forged my authorization. Then you funneled most of it into his accounts to cover debts he pretends don't exist." "That's not." She stopped, the lie snagging on its own thread. "He needed help. It was temporary. I was going to pay it back." "Using what?" I asked. "His winnings." I opened the envelope and spread the last pages across the table. A printout of the charity fund he managed, money flowing to personal cards, emails about markers in Vegas, a repossession notice drafted against the BMW he wore like a crown. "You weren't helping a man," I said. "You were feeding a furnace." Her lips flattened. For a second, I saw something like grief, maybe for the fantasy she'd bought, maybe for the life she'd mortgaged to do it. Then her shoulders squared. You've been spying on me. I've been auditing my future, I said. And Ethan's. His name landed sharper than any spreadsheet. She flinched. Don't drag him into this. You already did, I answered. Every dollar you siphoned was food off his table, school off his horizon, stability out of his house. Silence opened, wide and deep. She studied the photos like they belonged to someone else, then turned a page as if repetition might change the results. When she looked up, the fight in her eyes had shifted into that cold, professional calm I'd fallen for when we were younger, the one that could say a hard truth without blinking. What do you want, Michael? She asked. I'm going to be exact, I said, and slid a manila folder toward her. You're going to leave tonight. Pack what's personal and only that. You'll sign these preliminary divorce documents in the morning. My attorney will meet you at 9. I'll keep the house. I'll have full custody of Ethan. You'll walk away without claiming the loan as a marital obligation. No alimony. I won't pursue criminal charges for the forgery or the theft. That's my offer. Her laugh was too loud for the room. You think you can just dictate? Yes, I said flat, because the alternative is court and discovery, and your name next to Daniel's in a story that ends with both of you paying strangers to dismantle your lives in public. Her mouth opened, then closed. The math was writing itself on her face. I still love you, she said suddenly, like a Hail Mary. I got lost. Daniel made me feel. She searched for the right invoice code for desire. Seen by a man who had sex with you in hotels while you stole from your family to cover his debts. I said. The word sex cracked the air, honest and ugly. Being seen isn't the same as being valued. You forgot the difference. Anger flared. You drove me to it, she snapped. You and your spreadsheets. Your routines. You haven't touched me like you wanted me in years. My hand shook, just a little. I did. Even when you rolled away. Even when you came home smelling like someone else's cologne and called it work. I wanted my wife, Laura. The woman who used to laugh when I burned pancakes. The woman who swore we'd always tell each other the truth, even when it hurt. Her eyes watered. I'm sorry, she whispered, and for a heartbeat the apology felt real enough to thaw something in me. Then I looked down at the signatures, the transfers, the timestamps that had outlived kisses, and the warmth receded like a tide. This is not punishment, I said quietly. It's containment. I'm protecting our son and what remains of my dignity. She stared at the folder, weighing futures. When she spoke again, her voice was small. Where will I go? Your choice, I said. Claire is in town. Daniel's couch may be occupied. The humor was bitter and brief. There's a hotel card in the envelope. 2 nights. After that, you'll need a plan. That's cruel. It's generous, I said. Cruel would be forwarding this binder to your HR, the DA, and your parents. Cruel would be asking Ethan to explain to a judge why he prefers a home without surprise withdrawals. She reached for the pen, then stopped, swallowing hard. If I sign, can I still see him? Yes, I said. On my terms at first. We'll revisit when the dust settles. He deserves a mother who isn't laundering her love through somebody else's crisis. Her hand moved. The pen whispered across the page. She signed again and again, initialing where the tabs told her. When she finished, she set the pen down like it weighed 100 pounds. Can I say goodbye to him tonight? She asked. He's out, I said. Pack now. Leave the note on his desk. Keep it honest. He'll smell the truth if you try to perfume it. She stood, shaky, then steadied. Do you hate me? I considered the question, surprised by the shape of the answer. No, I said. I'm mourning you. She went upstairs. I listened to drawers open and close, to the small sounds of a life being folded into bags. I gathered the papers, slid them back into their order, shut the binder. When she came down with 2 suitcases and the red dress draped over her arm like a casualty, she paused at the door. Michael, she said. I looked up. Thank you for not destroying me. You did that, I said, without heat. I just stopped the spread. The door clicked. The house exhaled. Outside, the temperature finally dropped, and the quiet pressed in like snow. I stood at the table a long time, hand on the closed binder, feeling the precise ache of a wound cut clean. Tomorrow there would be logistics, attorneys, passwords, locks. Tonight there was only the hollow arithmetic of absence, and the small, stubborn mercy of having chosen the least ugly way to end a lie. The morning the news broke, I sat at the kitchen table with a black coffee in hand, scrolling through the Denver Post headline that spelled Daniel's downfall in bold. Local executive arrested in fraud and embezzlement scheme. His mugshot glared back at me, all smug arrogance drained into exhaustion. It was a face I'd seen before, across a cracked BMW bumper and in the shadow of a hotel lobby. Now the world was seeing it too. The article laid it out mercilessly: embezzlement of charity funds, falsified invoices, gambling debts with shady contacts in Las Vegas. He wasn't a titan of industry, just another greedy man who believed money could cover every lie. Laura's name didn't appear in the story, but I knew it was only a matter of time before whispers spread in her firm. By noon that day, her world began collapsing like a house of cards. She came home early, pale, eyes wide with dread. "They called me into HR," she said flatly, setting her handbag on the counter. "Summit's launching a compliance review. They know I—" She cut herself off, but she didn't need to finish. I'd already seen the bank transfers, the forged signatures, the borrowed money that was never hers to give. Within 48 hours, her career at Summit Compliance Group was over. They called it a violation of policy. I called it poetic justice. Watching her carry a cardboard box of office trinkets into the house felt surreal. Just months ago, she had stood in that same doorway, perfumed and glowing after nights with Daniel, smiling like she carried secrets too exciting to share. Now she shuffled in with wilted flowers, framed certificates, and a stapler, avoiding my eyes. Daniel, meanwhile, was paraded across every news channel. Investigators pulled skeletons from every closet, phony expense reports, shell companies, unpaid car notes. The BMW he'd clipped me with months earlier was repossessed and towed from his luxury apartment complex. Claire, his wife from Chicago, filed for divorce the same day his bail was denied. His empire, built on bravado and fraud, had turned to dust overnight. Laura retreated into herself. She rented a rundown apartment near Capitol Hill with peeling paint and a view of an alleyway dumpster. The place smelled of damp carpet and desperation. I dropped Ethan off once, just to prove to him and myself what her choices had bought her. She stood in the doorway in faded sweatpants, hair tied back, offering a forced smile that fooled no one. Ethan hugged her stiffly, then got back in my car without a word. At home, things shifted. The silence that had once been suffocating now felt peaceful. Ethan and I settled into a rhythm: school runs, simple dinners, evenings spent watching basketball or working on his college essays. He laughed more. He opened up more. He told me, one night when the Nuggets were on, that he felt lighter not having to tiptoe around his mother's moods. It was a brutal truth, but an honest one. I found work at a smaller auditing firm in downtown Denver. The pay wasn't what it had been, but the respect was there. They valued my meticulousness, the same trait Laura once mocked as boring. I started enjoying the work again, free of the corporate politics that had chained me before. There was a quiet dignity in rebuilding, not flashy, not dramatic, just steady, brick by brick. But in quiet moments, when the house was still, I thought about what had been lost. Not just the marriage, but the illusion of partnership. For years, I had believed in a shared future, in the solidity of vows spoken under the Rocky Mountain sky. Now those words felt like counterfeit bills, convincing at first glance, worthless upon inspection. One evening, Laura called me. Her voice cracked as she said, "I never meant for it to go this far." I let her words hang there, knowing she wasn't really apologizing, just trying to lessen her own guilt. Finally, I replied, "You chose every step of the way, and every choice brought you here." She cried softly, but I didn't offer comfort. That was no longer my role. The wreckage was complete. Daniel behind bars, Laura unemployed and adrift, Ethan firmly by my side. I hadn't orchestrated their downfall with malice, only precision. I'd simply exposed the truth and let gravity do the rest. Fraud collapses when examined closely, whether in ledgers or in marriages. And so, in the ruins of their lies, I found something I hadn't expected: freedom. Autumn came slow that year. The maples in our Aurora neighborhood burned red and gold, their leaves swirling across the driveway like confetti at a parade I hadn't signed up for. Each evening, I sat on the porch with Ethan, sometimes talking, sometimes just watching the sky bruise into sunset over the Rockies. It felt different now, lighter, quieter. For the first time in years, peace wasn't something abstract. It was tangible. Laura was gone, her presence reduced to bi-weekly texts about visitation and the occasional awkward Sunday afternoon. She rented a dim apartment off Capitol Hill, working as a receptionist at a law office that treated her like furniture. Once, when I dropped Ethan off, I saw her through the window, shoulders hunched, eyes dull, answering phones with the monotone of someone whose best cards had already been played. It was a far cry from the woman in red dresses who used to stride into conferences like she owned the place. Ethan had adjusted better than I expected. When the judge granted me full custody, he told me quietly afterward, "I want to stay here anyway." The way he said it, calm, certain, made me realize he had seen more than I thought. Kids always do. He still visited Laura, but he came back subdued, as though her apartment carried a gravity that pulled at his energy. "It just feels sad there," he admitted once. I didn't argue. Life in our house found rhythm again. Mornings were coffee and cereal. Evenings were homework at the kitchen table, me checking spreadsheets while Ethan scribbled equations. Sometimes we'd order pizza and argue about basketball stats. Sometimes we'd sit in companionable silence. The absence of lies was like oxygen, simple, clean enough. Work shifted too. My new firm was small, the kind where everyone knew your kid's name and nobody cared about flashy suits. They valued precision, integrity, the very traits Laura once rolled her eyes at when she called me too rigid. Here, it made me indispensable. There was pride in that, the quiet kind that doesn't need applause. Laura, of course, didn't see it that way. One evening, she confronted me outside Ethan's school. She was waiting by her car, arms crossed, a storm simmering in her expression. "You destroyed me," she said, voice sharp. "Daniel, my job, everything. I lost it all because of you." I let her finish, then met her eyes. "No, you lost it because of choices you made. I just stopped covering the tracks." Her mouth tightened, like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the numbers to back her claim. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Then Ethan walked out, saw us, and stiffened. She forced a smile, but he didn't buy it. He came to my side, shoulders squaring like a man's. Later in the car, he said, "She blames you for her screw-ups. That's messed up." I gripped the wheel, fighting the ache in my chest. Sometimes people would rather blame someone else than face what they've done. He nodded slowly. "I'd rather live with the parent who tells the truth." The words were simple, but they carved deep. For years I doubted myself, wondered if my cold suspicion had pushed Laura away. Hearing my son choose truth over illusion was the closest thing to redemption I'd felt. As weeks turned into months, Laura faded from the center of our lives. She called less. She visited less. The woman who once dictated the tempo of our household was now background noise, occasional ripples in the steady current Ethan and I had built. I didn't hate her. Hatred requires energy, and I'd wasted enough of that already. What I felt was something quieter, detachment. One evening in late October, I sat on the porch alone. The mountains glowed pink in the last light, the kind of beauty that sneaks up on you when you stop looking for drama. My phone buzzed, a message from a new acquaintance at work, someone who'd made me laugh during long audits and suggested grabbing dinner sometime. I stared at the text for a long minute, thumb hovering. Then I set the phone face down on the table. Not yet. I wasn't ready to fill the empty spaces with someone new. Peace was enough. For once, I didn't need to chase or mend or prove. I just needed to breathe, to let the quiet settle, to sit in the fading light with the knowledge that I hadn't lost everything. I'd lost a wife, yes, but I'd gained clarity, dignity, and the respect of the only person whose opinion mattered most, my son. The leaves rustled. The porch light flicked on. Somewhere in the house, Ethan called out, asking about dinner. I stood, brushed the dust from my hands, and stepped inside. Peace, I thought, wasn't the absence of pain. It was the decision to stop feeding it.